Bob, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing really well. In fact, I didn't know that I was back at WKRP. I see a turntable with 45 records on it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, am I not at WKRP?
Oh, no. I love doing
Yes.
this. And we had actually...
Real records.
We have a jazz show on Saturdays that's almost all entirely vinyl, and I was manning it last Saturday and broke a needle on that one. Or I could have two turntables going. A needle, yeah.
And
stylus,
records?
yeah.
You need to tell our younger audience what these are.
No. I want to keep that information to myself so that I can lord it over them in the future. Jamie Yarborough also sitting at a microphone here. How you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Johnny, our answer to Johnny Fever.
Yeah. As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly. All right. Hey, Bob, so I saw you post, so I know that you have your morning town hall meeting down at the Fisherman's Restaurant, and today you were talking about the legalization, perhaps, as an idea of prostitution. How did that go over in the group?
Well, actually, we had a divergent group, and of course, we always have a difference of opinions. Mm-hmm. And we had some people that say that, hey, if we legalize prostitution, aren't we just denigrating our moral fiber? I mean, where does it go from here? All right. I mean, you could have, let's say, legalization of marijuana, for example. Well, maybe not that far, but you could go.
Isn't that happening in January?
That's right, it is.
So, yeah.
Yes. Who knows? There could be a pot farm on every corner. You could legalize meth. Where is it going to go from here? That's one of the arguments that was presented.
Do you find that as being a logical fallacy, the slippery slope fallacy?
What I'm saying here is that was one of the arguments that was presented. Another argument said, what a person does with their own body is up to them. Mm-hmm. And as long as they don't harm anybody, as long as they keep it to consenting adults, mm-hmm. That's fine. Another person said, well, wait a minute, what's an adult? Is it 21? Is it 18? Could it be to 16?
Well, yeah.
14? What's an adult? It was a lively conversation this morning.
I bet it was.
And so I thought, well, maybe we ought to just extend this conversation to the internet. Mm-hmm. And because we never know what topic is going to come up at the daily town hall meeting, and extending it to other people is a good way to bring them into the conversation. Mm-hmm. And as you've seen by the thread of the conversation, it's been lively there.
Yeah.
And so... the conversation begins. Before, it was mainly theoretical. Mm-hmm. Now, with the Ninth Circuit Court weighing in and say, we want to take a look at this, mm-hmm. that becomes real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Potentially so. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I want to commend you too. Get this out of the way. I think it's amazing what you do with the town hall meetings, with Facebook in particular. I think it was probably a big reason, at least, how you use social media and how you engage folks in this county with social media. It's probably a big, at least in my eyes, a big reason why you beat Finnegan, and like it was important to your campaign, and something that I didn't see him do at all during the campaign, and I thought maybe that might have been a contributing factor, but you've kept it going.
Well, look, I like Mr. Finnegan.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And it's just that, hey, when you're in there for 20 years, somehow you just don't bring out any new ideas, new ways of doing things, the changes that you need to make in a county. And I lost that impetus when I'd served on the school board for 12 years. I thought, no, I've done it all.
Did you feel
it all?
Yeah.
And I really don't have any spark to get new ideas. And I thought, hey, if that happened to me after 12 years, that's the kind of thing that happens after a person of 20 years. And that's why we instituted, and the board voted 5-0 on this, to say, let's have the public weigh in to see if we want term limits.
Man, I can't go there with you. I don't think term limits are the answer, but that's me.
But wait a minute.
Hold on. Now you come with your own segues. Let me just stop you because I want to finish commending you for after you won. And you're still doing it. You still have the town hall meetings. You're still very much engaged and engaged in your constituency. And so kudos, because that's exactly what I think a politician of any stripe in any level should do. So I went down and witnessed what happens at the meetings a couple of weeks ago, and it was a lot of fun. I had a good time. And so congratulations on doing that, on staying involved and not just dropping and going, hey, I got elected. I don't need to listen to anybody anymore.
Well, of course,
that's great.
The reason that I ran in the first place was saying, hey, where are people having an outlet for their ideas? Mm-hmm. You come to the Board of Supervisors meeting, you have 3 minutes, nobody responds to you.
Yeah.
You don't know, were your ideas being heard? Mm-hmm. This way, of course, on a daily basis, if anybody has a problem, an idea, a concern, they can bring it to a bunch of people, including a supervisor or two.
Yeah, or two. Now, without getting into opening a can of worms with the Brown Act, it seems, in a way, very limiting, almost on a constitutional level, that you can't have any other supervisors there. You can only have the two. If you get more, then it's a violation of the Brown Act.
That's right.
Even in an informal setting like that, I mean, that seems cumbersome, I think, maybe, and almost anti-democratic in a way. Well, I understand transparency, but still.
I guess the idea of the Brown Act was to say, hey, if you get 3, that's a majority, and you could decide things before they even came before a board meeting.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And that prevents the public from weighing in.
Sure.
And so by having at least 1 or 2 supervisors on a daily basis, mm-hmm. where you can bring your ideas and not be ignored.
Yeah.
But basically be a participant in a discussion. And Jamie's been there for a long time. Sometimes.
What's this for? What are you shaking your head for? What are your thoughts on the early morning?
This episode reminds me of the town hall meetings. In the very beginning, after Bob was reelected and he started them up, I went down there and I participated, or at least I thought I would participate. And then later, just like this segment, this half hour here, it's being dominated by Bob. If it's not being dominated by Bob, it's dominated by Roger Gitlin.
Oh, at the meeting, okay,
Supervisor Gitlin. Excuse me. Anyway, it's okay to have a town hall forum, but not going backwards, but even towards the legalization of marijuana or the legalization of prostitution. What a person does with their own body. This goes back to people like Ron Paul, who pointed this out and wanted the legalization of all drugs. And I take some of the common sense viewpoints of him, and I also bring in somebody from the ancient past called Ross Perot, who said, you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, you should use them accordingly. If you're going to have a town hall meeting, you have to have your ears open more than your mouth. And unfortunately, I have stopped going to the town hall meetings because I see this repetition of the same things happening over and over again. Yesterday's news, I did this, I did that, and I don't see the exchange that was once promised.
Okay, well, Bob,
thank
how
you.
would you respond to that?
Well, actually, Jamie...
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. No, please.
Jamie is right. It tends to be dominated by the supervisors that are there. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because people are deferring to them, thinking they have all the answers.
Okay.
And, of course, they don't have all the answers, all right? But when you have a divergent group, and that group changes all the time. The same people are not there all the time. Mm-hmm. So consequently, it seems like you're covering the same ground that you've covered over and over, but you have new people there that haven't had that ground mm-hmm. covered before. Mm-hmm. So that's a problem. But I don't care. As long as people participate, that's basically what I'm after, because when people participate, I get new ideas presented mm-hmm. on a daily basis. Some are great. For example, Sharon, Sharon, all right, who basically never attends the town hall meeting, but she's in the restaurant, came to the group one day, I think it was in April, and said, we have a problem. And that problem is that on the 4th of July, when people are on South Beach, and there's hundreds of them out there for activities, there's no place for them to go. And she was absolutely right. How could we solve this problem? No money in the budget, all right, for porta potties. Well, we found out maybe we could collaborate with the harbor board and be able to provide those porta potties. And we did that, all right, with our 3 of them all the way along the beach. Came from a suggestion from a person who normally doesn't even attend a town hall meeting, but say, hey, I've got an idea. Can you solve this problem?
I love that problem because that's not a very sexy problem for government to handle, but that's exactly how government should work. That's the kind of thing government. So, Jamie, did you ever stand up at a meeting and go, hey, I don't feel like I'm being heard here?
Oh, yeah. I am well known for that very thing. Part of the reason that I'm even here is because I am outspoken. And I also commend Bob and Roger for attending these meetings. It was one of my observations from the very beginning of my new residency 9 years ago that part of the reason I moved back here, well, there were a number of different reasons, but when I first got back, I joined the Tea Party. And I joined the Tea Party mostly because it was an interaction between the Board of Supervisors, the City Council, the people who were running for office. They wanted to change. Now, aside from the political affiliation with the Republicans, I was in whole support of any time the people could get together and exchange ideas in a rational, controlled environment where people would be civil. And a town hall meeting sounded like the thing to do. I can't say enough about the need for one in this community because there are so many people that stand behind or sit behind their computers or behind their TVs. They grumble about the way things are, and they won't get out and talk to the people who actually have the ability to change things.
Yeah, exactly. I have this whole thing in my head about I see you, and you're walking down Bob. I see you walking down an aisle in Safeway, and Roger comes around the corner and he's pushing a thing. And then, so what happens if Lori Cowan comes around? Do y'all have to pretend you don't see each other and scatter? It's like a Brown Act violation.
By the way, I'd like to point out the fact that of the other 3 supervisors, none of them, to my knowledge, do the same thing these 2 do.
Couple of things I want to bring up with you, and of course, if you have anything to say. But first, you ran very closely with Roger and with Lori. How do you view this? Would you call it a schism in the board, and Lori sort of being lumped together or lumping herself together with the other 2? How do you view that? I mean, did that change plans once you were on the board, and that sort of became the case?
It's a mystery. And I really don't know how to respond to that because I try to get along with all the board members that are there. I was one of the ones that convinced Supervisor Cowan to run. I donated to her campaign. I convinced others to donate to her campaign. And unfortunately, the kinds of things that are controversial, and keep in mind that most of the things that come before the board are not controversial. We usually pass by 5-0, usually about 90% of them. So we're talking about a very small segment in that she's been on the other side of Roger and myself. Okay, and when we lose those fights, we move on, all right? I don't want to call them fights, I call them arguments, and differences of opinion. And it's turned out that she's had a different opinion than both Roger and myself on those minority of issues.
And that's exactly her right, and representing her constituency and doing all of that. Actually, no problem with that. Was it a surprise to you, though, the amount of difference?
It was. I don't want to belabor the issue, but it was a surprise. But still, on Lori's term and my term and Roger's term, we have 3.5 years almost, all right, left. And I'm hoping that we can have a more frank discussion and maybe convince her of an opinion that we may have, or she may convince us of an opinion that she may have.
And you said that 90% of the issues before the board are resolved with a 5-0 vote. So is that dialogue continuing? Or it's tempting to sort of say, oh, there's been a breakdown of a dialogue, it's this big split in the board, and it sounds like gridlock. But is that in fact the case?
Actually, it's not. What you're referring
and that creaking door was Jamie, actually.
What you're referring to is the kinds of things that you read in the triplicate. Unfortunately, the triplicate never reports on what happened at a board meeting. They've got the tape.
I don't have a ladder.
But you will not read the kinds of things, the issues that we're dealing with in the triplicate. But you will read any kind of controversy, especially if it involves Mr. Gitlin. Okay? So what the public is seeing is all this controversy surrounding the board and Mr. Gitlin and sometimes myself. And so you come away with an impression there must be this big controversy on the board.
Then that's sure, and that's sort of that's almost like a function of journalism in general, and not that they purposefully go out and play up sensationalism for bad things, but that's what people, that's what sells papers. I can understand that. I have to two things. I want to hear your response to that,
okay.
And I also another thing I want to commend you on was when the board was going after Roger for the whole what was it the halfway
Oxford
the rehab
house.
the Oxford house that he went. You just kind of sat back and kind of was like, I have no comment. It was just you played that very well. I thought it was nice not to get a dog in that fight.
Well, the main thing was that they were trying to censure Mr. Gitlin. All right. And it was a discussion item. No action to be taken, just discussion. Well, what good is that?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that?
It's just making a show.
I said I refuse to participate in this discussion, right? Because it doesn't go anywhere. If you had an action item behind it, then I might want to weigh in. But just a discussion for discussion's sake, so that basically we can rag on Mr. Gitlin. I'm not into that.
And that makes the headlines and all of that. Yeah, Jamie, your response really quickly.
Okay, as I said, I came into the community with Ron Paul under my feathers, and I agree with a lot of his straightforward, almost non-political points of view. As a libertarian, I also was awoken by Ron Paul. He cured my apathy, so to speak. There's a bumper sticker to that effect. And I looked at the number of different varieties of politics were out there. I went from a Democrat to a Republican, just so I could vote for him in the primary. But then about the same time, Libertarian came up. Gary Johnson threw his hat in the race. His son, to this day, is in the Senate. I also found that there was another party out there that was starting to come up called the Coffee Party. And it took both the Democrats and the Republicans to task in terms of their results, and started to say, well, if you're only interested in results, why are you bothering with opposing forces that are more concerned with fighting each other than getting the results?
Yeah, if the ends justifies the means, then why all the concern about the means?
I mean, if we're going to now, a lot of people have nailed me as a conservative, and yet I have progressive liberal points of view. I am an independent. I like the idea that if you want something, you take rational steps to get to it in a safe manner so that everybody benefits, the rising tide that lifts all boats. I'm not a Bernie Sanders fan. I'm not into socialism. I'm not into communism. But I ground my politics in things like the Constitution and the idea of freedom in its dictionary form, which means with a separation of freedom out of control becomes anarchy or chaos. You have to have some control over random actions, so to speak,
Sure.
supposedly in the best interest of everybody. Democracy is not a good word because democracy is a fatal ideology. That's mob rule. The will of the majority is not always the correct thing to do because even the majority can be wrong. It's why we have a democratic constitutional republic, and people forget that fact.
Okay. I don't want to get into like poli-sci here.
Okay.
Let's bring it back to actually boots on the ground. Here's what's going on right now. We talked a lot about public involvement and the meetings, the community meetings, the town hall meetings. There's the opposite side to government as well, which is the backroom stuff and the things that happen out of sight. Tell us about your trip to Washington, D.C. What did you discover? Who did you talk to? What's going on back there? And were you able to push our agenda in the smoke-filled rooms back east?
Thank you. All of that in 3 minutes, is that right?
We'll go a little over. Sean will be all right with it.
I think the important thing to remember is that the old adage about out of sight, out of mind, not only does it pertain to local politics, but of course, naturally, to national politics. California is one of the furthest states away from Washington, D.C. We are, in most cases, especially Delaware County, out of sight, out of mind. When Chairman Howard went back there to Washington with Jerry Hemmingson, they were counseled that, look, if you're going to state your case, you can't just state it once. You got to be back here.
Yeah.
And so consequently, that was one of the reasons that I wanted to go back and reemphasize the kinds of things that we are advocating for.
Don't we have a lobbyist?
What's that?
Don't we have a lobbyist?
We have a lobbyist. Unfortunately, it's not the lobbyist that really makes the difference in Washington, because the lobbyist basically is just going to represent you when there are problems that come up and the legislation underway that they can make a case. But when we have no legislation underway and we have to be able to create a situation that solves our problems, then you need to be back there. Now,
So the role of the lobbyist is more reactionary as far as issues go? Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And keeping us informed on what kinds of legislation is coming along that's going to affect us. So we have to make our own case. And of course, the case that we're trying to make is we need last chance grade replaced.
Yeah.
All right? Not just repaired.
Yeah.
You know, if you spend $2 million a year, you could spend 150 years before you spent the $300,000 that's the minimum,
million,
or $300 million that's the minimum that's going to take to repair that.
Yeah, yeah.
So naturally, Washington views this as a cost-benefit analysis. How much does it cost us to keep that road open year after year, even though it's falling in and we have to do the repairs and so on, versus $300 million to $1.2 billion for a new road. So we need to convince them back in Washington that this is worth the money that they're going to spend. Number one, it's a national highway. It's a U.S. highway. All right, closing that or even going down to one lane does not serve the interests of the United States because it is a main highway.
When are we going to have the next major earthquake?
Whenever the Earth decides it's going to quake.
And if it happens tomorrow and we didn't spend the last 10 years building the new bypass, what's going to happen?
We're cut off.
Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen.
you.
I asked that very same. Actually, former Supervisor Blackburn asked that question at the meeting the other day, and the answer was that they're going to dig into that hillside, create an open lane, and have that thing open, at least for one-lane traffic, in a matter of days or weeks. Now, that's
What, in the event of a failure?
in the event of a failure, that's what they're going to do.
Cut through an active slide?
They're going to cut through. They're going to cut through the mountain. But the point here is that assumes that the highway fails and falls in the ocean.
Yeah.
it doesn't tell us anything about the mountain falling onto the highway
Exactly.
and that going into the ocean.
Exactly. Or the stability of that slide
Sure.
after it's moved like that.
You
That's
only have to take a look at Highway 1 down there near San Luis Obispo. All right. It's been closed for months, right? Because the hillside came down on the road. Well, if you carve into that hillside, what do you create? You
You're
create
undermining
an
the hillside,
overhang
yeah.
that's going to go over that highway.
Yeah.
All right. And that's unstable in the first place because that whole hillside has been slipping. Not a very good idea.
No.
But Federal Highways Administration, basically, and Caltrans, they're saying, what is the most expedient? Let me get rid of this.
Sure.
What is the most expedient way to get rid of it? All right, to solve the problem, and that's how they solve the problem.
Wow.
Is the most expedient way.
But back-
We are saying in Washington, when I talked to the administration and I was able to go to the White House and to talk to this special counsel to the president, all right, that there's got to be a better way. And he gave me some ideas that I'm going to be presenting at the board meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
And it will be a whole new different
Wait, tomorrow
approach.
or next Tuesday?
I'm sorry, next Tuesday.
Okay, gotcha.
It will be a whole different approach that we have not even thought of
Really?
before. And I invite you to be at that board meeting.
I'd
so
love
that
to come
you
and
will
hear
be
that.
able to listen to that
Okay.
and
Interesting.
See.
So
now
we've-
remember, this will be a controversial idea.
Uh-huh.
Those controversial ideas usually get shot down in flames, especially if they come from me or Mr. Gitlin. But I expect
Interesting.
that.
Wow. Okay. No. I would like to hear what that is. I'd like to hear what the proposal is. That's fine. Was there any other issues that you discussed back there? I know
Well,
that's
sure. The
that's
Secure
big one.
Rural Schools and Communities Act, of course.
The airport.
Well, let me go with the first
Okay,
one
sorry,
first. All right. And that is one that has provided $1 million a year for schools and to keep our roads open. Okay. Well, that legislation expired 2 years ago. And so consequently, we're trying to get that legislation reauthorized. And it's a big, big problem because it affects the rural areas in western United States versus the more urban eastern United States. And but that's important because we don't get any tax money in that federal land. And the original deal was, look, you can have all kinds of logging you want. Sustained logging is what we're looking for. And the timber that was cut on federal forest land, the local counties and school districts split 25% of the revenue. Well, of course, when Mr. Clinton came along and shut down the forests, and there's no more logging, consequently, that revenue wasn't produced. And so the Secure Rules and Schools and
It's like
Communities Act
backfilling
was
that, yeah.
made to be able to make up that revenue. And I was originally a part of the original legislation when I was on the California School Boards Association Board of Directors. We did that in year 2000. Mr. Finnegan represented the counties and I represented the schools. We got that. Now we're back at that same battle again, all right? And so that's one of the things that I presented to the White House and along with the Congress and other interested parties back in Washington. And of course, you're talking about the airport. And we're talking about essential air service, and that is a carve out. It's a special piece of legislation for rural areas that are located hundreds of miles away from a major airport. And so it looks like with that, the administration, the president, wanted to do away with EAS. Doing away with EAS would eliminate our air service. So we would have a great terminal. You could basically call it a homeless shelter, because there would be no use for it for an air service. Well, we didn't want that to happen. And so that's one of the things I went back to Washington for, to ensure that the Congress will not eliminate EAS, but reauthorize it.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the other kinds of things that went back for. So there's other kinds of things that we're hoping for. You know, when you go back to Washington, you remember the Board of Supervisors, you're just not representing the county. You're representing all the entities that are in the county.
Sure,
For
yeah.
example, the harbor. We need that harbor dredged, all right, periodically. It's really important. They have a debt that is horrendous that they're going to have to deal with. And maybe there's some way we can get that debt forgiven, all right? We need to be able to maintain these areas, harbor and city, county, as viable enterprises. And all of us are having severe severe money problems.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the problem.
Wow. All right, we've run into Sean's show. We should call it here. Bob, I'd love to invite you back sometime and get more time on the end to delve in more in the details. I think that's fantastic, and I look forward to the supervisors meeting this Tuesday. I think I'll come down and just hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Berkowitz, Delnor County Board of Supervisors.